It was unfortunate to me that everything I'd heard about politics kind of reigned to be true.
Oh, I'm like, I left that in high school. It'd be really hard for me to want to walk back into those feelings. I'm Maxie McCoy, and this is Never Been Asked, where I invite my guests to break out of whatever box they've been put in. Today, we're talking politics with not just one, but two women, each making moves in government. So stay tuned later in the episode for my conversation with LA City Council member Nithya Raman. And first up, by the time she graduated college last year and gave the commencement speech, my guest, Bushra Amiwala, had run for office, lost, run for office, and won, becoming the youngest ever Muslim elected official in the US. I don't know what your college extracurriculars were, but wow, Bushra, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on here today, and what a sweet introduction.
Well, we are very lucky to have you. And you have done it all. You've done a TEDx talk. You've been on the cover of Time. You were named one of Glamour's College Women of the Year. That's just to name a few. High record breaker. But I do want to know, what is it that you've never been asked?
I have never been asked about the relationship that I have with my faith and the way that that influences my leadership style and my day to day.
Yeah, tell us about it. How has it shaped you as a leader?
Yeah. So, one of the five pillars of Islam is charity giving and service work. So, that's something that I've always held very close to me. And growing up, I never had the money to donate to organizations, but there were so many different causes that I cared about, whether it be poverty, hunger, homelessness. So, what I did have a lot of was time. So, that influenced me to volunteer for five different nonprofits, the 5 days of the week for five different causes. And that's something that I really carried with me and channeled within my leadership style. And someone once told me that the best way to make long term practical change is through public policy. So I can take that much time, spend it in the political sphere, and make a greater, more substantive long term impact, which I thought was very good advice. And my faith teaches me to be a very intentional person. So there's always very positive intention behind everything that I say, everything that I do, and my leadership style and ability as well.
Yeah, I love that. Do you feel like your faith flourished as you've, come into this office?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that my faith teaches as well is that everything happens for a reason,
Mm.
right? Everything that's happening, whether it be good or bad, happens for a reason. And I think that's really one kept me grounded and kept me very humble and making sure humility is at the forefront of the way that I carry myself and present myself, and understanding there's a great deal of responsibility that comes with success as well. But it also made it really easy to cope with the loss when I lost my first election, too.
Which I want to talk to you about that exactly, because as you were just explaining that, like the sentiment of everything happening for a reason, I was thinking about, exactly that, the fact that you lost and then you won. So can you tell me a little bit about, for anyone who doesn't know your story, listeners who are hearing, about your journey for the first time, can you tell us a little bit more about what it was that you lost and what was the time period in between when you ran again?
Yeah, really good question. So, backtracking a little bit, my senior year of high school, I took an AP government and politics class, and that was my first introduction to US government and politics, right? Apart from what you take in civics in like seventh grade and the Constitution test. So,
My
uh,
seventh grade was Texas state history. So there's
yeah,
that.
exactly. And from there, I actually had a really great, exciting internship opportunity lined up with our senator at the time, our US senator from the state of Illinois, Senator Mark Kirk, who actually was a Republican senator. And it was someone on his campaign that saw leadership ability and potential in me that I didn't see in myself at the time. And they actually asked me to run for political office myself. And that's where that journey came from. I never imagined or envisioned myself in that space. It's something that I never thought I could do. And it's hard to picture yourself in a space where you don't see someone who looks like you represented or reflected in there to begin with.
Yeah.
And I first ran for public office in March of 2017. So 4 years ago, I ran for the Cook County Board of Commissioners, which oversees public health and public safety. So Cook County Hospital and Cook County Jail. And I lost my first election and I ran against a 16-year Democratic incumbent. So it was a Democratic primary election and he had been there for 16 years and I was 19 years old. So
No big deal. No big deal.
but in a 3-person primary race, I came in second with 30% of the vote, which was super
Wow.
exciting. And that was around 15,000 votes all across Cook
When
County.
you lost, how did you feel? Were you like, I don't know if I can run again? Were you just amped up at what you were able to accomplish because you learned so much? Like, what was going on for you?
In the moment, I definitely focused on the fact that I had lost more than anything else. And it was really hard to cope with it because it
We
was,
do that. It's like
yeah,
really hard to be optimistic when you've just lost something that you worked really hard for.
100%. And it was a very public loss as well. So, although my campaign was very centered and it was local government, there were a lot of people nationally that were watching my race very closely to see what would happen. And I felt as though I disappointed everyone,
Yeah.
even though everyone was like, we're still so proud of you. Like, you achieved and accomplished so much. But I think it was very easy to be focused on that piece. And I was like, I am never running for office again.
As you're saying this, I'm just thinking about, you had all of those eyeballs on you and you were 19, right?
Mhm.
What was that like? Was it hard to absorb all of that? And even still, right? Like you're dealing with a level of attention that most people, especially when they're in politics, they're decades your senior. Has that been something that you've had to learn how to cope with?
Mhm. Absolutely. Something that you don't get trained in that. And it's also, I don't know very many people that just happen to be in the same position as me. And trying to even network with those people to get that type of advice has been super difficult and challenging in itself, right? Because you understand people are at this level of like productivity and busyness where they don't have like the time for like new
Mhm.
connections. So I feel like even my mentors in my close circle didn't really know how to best advise me at some time. So I really did feel like I was on my own for a bit, but I had like this flashlight almost glaring on me at all times. Which I think
Yeah.
again, it just comes, there's this like added layer of responsibility that comes from being held at that position.
Right. So, as you're talking about not, the networking and the not being able to necessarily get the advice because no one, when you're the youngest ever, it's ever for a reason because no one has been there before. And, in our community and a lot of people listening, whether you're in politics, whether you're in, the creative arts, no matter where you're at, you need those mentors and sponsors to get you to another level. You need your community to get you to another level. Do you have some tips on building a community of women that support and have supported your rise?
Yes, definitely. I think the best piece of advice I could give in terms of coalition building and building that base of mentorships and support is being genuine and authentic. I found myself putting on a show, kind of, especially for people, just because I was super nervous and insecure about my age. And I already knew people are like, well, she's 19, she's super young and inexperienced. And I feel like a lot of those comments had some sort of validity behind them too. So, as a way to mask that, I would always try to double make sure I'm doubling, dotting my I's and double
Yeah.
crossing my T's. And to the point where I almost was losing that value that my mentors could provide because I wasn't being authentic with them.
I've never been the youngest ever at anything, but I've definitely had periods and chapters of my life. Like when I was in sports broadcasting, everyone that I saw was like platinum blonde and tiny and like blown out hair and talked a certain way. And I didn't personally fit that mold. And so
Mhm.
I tried to play the part until that part just like really didn't work for me. How did you start to go through that almost like unlearning process to start to be more authentic?
That is such a good question. I definitely think it was after reading the very first story that was published about me, written by someone
Mhm.
else and their perspective, and reading that from a third party lens and third party view. I was like, this is not how I want my story to be told.
What was it?
And
What about it?
it was written in a lens where it was like, this is the poor Muslim girl who has been hurt by the
Mhm.
Trump administration, and now she's running for public office. Like, I feel like all of this skill set, background, and expertise and service work that I had done had all been masked and mirrored, and there was almost this label that had been put on me. And I didn't want that to be like the rubber stamp story that's being
Mhm.
told about me. And I knew that there was this subconscious belief that people have for Muslim women in particular. And I didn't want to fit that mold. And that's not
Yeah.
what my story was either. So I was reclaiming the agency for my own voice.
Yeah, yeah. I Can imagine that that is difficult. But I also, as you're saying that, and we all know how media and people can kind of write the narrative that is not yours, and being able to absorb and reflect on that and then make different choices. What did you start to do differently after you read that and said, like, I don't want to be in this box, like this isn't my box?
Every time at the end of an interview, when they would say, "Is there anything else you would like to add?" I would make sure that I would actually add something.
Say it.
I would
Interesting.
exactly. I would say at first I was really shy to bring stuff like that up. I didn't know what the relationship with like a reporter looked like. I didn't really have any media training. I was kind of going all into it blindly. I was super nervous a lot of the times too. But again, being myself, as cheesy as it sounds, is exactly what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And I was doing themselves and myself a disservice by not upholding that.
Totally, totally. It's just a journey learning so many of these things, and you have learned a lot. And you're also the daughter of parents who have been on an incredible journey. Can you tell us a bit about where the story of your family sits, and the lineage that you come from?
Absolutely. So, my dad is the youngest of 12 siblings, and he was born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan. And being the youngest, you would think that you were coddled a bit more, you were babied, but it was actually the opposite. He actually had to work extremely hard to make ends meet for his family, and that financial stress and pressure was always something that he was raised and self-aware of. So, at the age of 3, he began selling eggs to his neighbors in Pakistan, which I hear and I'm like, that is so insane to me that that's the background that he was raised with. And from that age, hustling. And at the age of 18, he was able to come to the United States with $20 in his pocket and worked every job from bussing tables to flipping burgers to delivering pizzas to driving a taxi to
Yeah.
finally owning his own clothing store on the south side of Chicago.
So cool.
Yeah.
So
And he,
cool. Do you
and
remember all of that hard work about him as a kid?
Absolutely. My dad would put in such long hours. I remember
Yeah.
vacation, like he never had a day off. So that's one thing that like we were like, oh, parents get the weekends off. Like I didn't know that was
What?
a thing. So, and it really appreciated every time that we had with him when he wasn't working. And we knew that he did all of that so we could have a future that he didn't have access to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as my mother likes to say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And the work that you have put in here, I'm sure, with all the spotlight that you've been explaining, with the lack of people understanding, what it's like to be in your shoes is no easy task. And you have clearly put so much work in for your community, for the people around you, not just for yourself. But when you look at that and you look at your experiences, was anything about politics surprising to you? Like, were there elements of getting into politics that you didn't even know could be a challenge?
Yeah, I was really surprised as to how clicky everything was. Which I feel like maybe won't be a surprise to some people, but I felt like I was in high school again, where I was like, wow, there are these cliques of people that like stick within themselves. They don't like outsiders. They don't want to, mingle with people outside of that group. And it's like the big boys club. Like that's literally what it was. So it
Right?
was unfortunate to me that everything I'd heard about politics kind of reigned to be true.
Oh, I'm like, I left that in high school. It'd be really hard for me to want to walk back into those feelings. Like, even as you say the word click, which is like a word that I haven't heard in a while, it makes me feel something. It makes me feel like an outcast, even just hearing the word. How did you deal with those feelings? And also, not to say become the in crowd or become the popular girl, because that's not what it's about, but we do need to be in the circles of power in order to get the sponsorship we need, to get the
Hmm.
fundraising we need, to get
Yep.
the lessons that we need. So, how are you able to reframe that to kind of lean into being a part of that world? Or did you just stay on the outside?
No, I definitely the second time around made it and got the street cred and made it inside of that clique, which I think was so valuable that second time around. But I did it by leaning on the other people and making them my mentors. Even the person that I ran against the first time, him and I got breakfast a week after the election, and he sat me down and he said, there is so much power that came from your run for office that I hope you see and you realize you definitely should run for something else again. Actually,
Mm,
you should run for the Board of Education. The election
right?
is in 6 months. Great idea. Education's always something that's been very important to you. And he was the person that motivated me and inspired me to run again 6 months
Yeah.
later.
That's awesome. Like you need those people. And my work has been in women's leadership the last decade, and there are so many conversations around mentors specifically. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about all the women I've been in rooms with who raise their hand and say, I don't have a mentor. I don't know how to find one, and then feel the guilt that they don't have one. And mentorship is something that has been a journey for you. You went from not having it to, even in that anecdote, having it. What are the keys to finding mentorship in your perspective?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think the key is one, it's not just a give relationship, right? It's give and take. So it's remembering that there are elements of yourself that you have to offer as well to your mentor, and it's being very intentional with their time and right. Having an agenda, being very respectful, being on time.
Having an agenda.
Mhm.
Love it about you. I actually do that with a couple of my mentors, one that I got to talk to last night. I'm like, I got 3 things for you,
Yep.
and we got to get through all of them. That's brilliant.
And they appreciate it. They love to hear it. It shows that you're prepared, that you've done your research, that you have the knowledge base to dump into something like this. And I think it's just a really good testament to the respect that you have for that relationship.
100%. It's that's such a good word, like a respect for the relationship. If there is someone else who's listening to this and maybe thought politics would be nice, or I really want to create change, or I have these issues that, I can't, I'm not able to really exercise and see the change that I want to see there, but I don't know if I could run for any office. What advice would you give to those listeners who are contemplating some kind of big move like that?
hmm Something that I tell people all the time is that if you ever have the thought or inclination, or it crosses your mind to run for public office someday, that is not a normal thought. That is not something that like the everyday average person thinks about. So if that's something you've
I know
considered,
I've never thought about
right.
it.
So if that's something you've ever considered, 100% go for it and do it. And you are doing a huge service to your community by putting yourself in a position to put yourself out there to represent them at that level and at that sphere. And that's something that's not taken lightly. And if that's something that you have ever had the interest in doing, 100% go for it.
What is the first step somebody should take in the go for it?
I would definitely say volunteering and or working for a different political candidate is like such a good way to learn and see what campaigning entails. And it's such a good way to expand your network too. It's a way to meet other people that are working for campaigns. You can pull them in onto your campaign then.
Mhm.
Seeing how someone else manages their campaign is a really good reflection for how you should run things, learn do's and don'ts from someone else is a really good way to go about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense because it's I feel like we all have such a resistance to sucking at something. Like we want to I only want to do it if I know how. I only want to do it if I have the right people. But the reality is if you don't start by not knowing, you're literally never going to start. So volunteering sounds like an awesome way to do that. Bushra, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful, but I want to know before we end, what are you batshit grateful for?
Oh my God, such a good question. I feel like I'm so grateful for just my board of directors, right? My friends, my family, my mentors, the people that are always rooting for me, who provide their unconditional love and support and keep me grounded. I'm so grateful for them.
Well, I'm
100%.
sure you are the easiest and most delightful person to support. You're doing incredible work. So, Bushra, thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved being on the show. Your energy is super great, and I hope I mirrored it.
You did all of that and then some. You good, girl. You good. Coming up next, the political gets personal with LA City Councilmember Nithya Raman. Our guests aren't the only ones who get to answer questions that they've never been asked. You can join in on all the fun. Go to womanoncollective.com/worksheet for questions you've never been asked. Because hey, newsflash, you don't need all the right answers. You need all the right questions. That's how you can take the inspiration from this episode and actualize it in your own life. So go on now. Questions for this episode that you've never been asked are waiting for you for free at womanoncollective.com/worksheet.
Hi.
Hi, we're so happy you are here. I know many people got to know you as a candidate. They got to know you for your truly community-focused progressive policies. But for this conversation, I want you to tell me what you have never been asked.
Well, I think people are cautious about asking women this, especially women who are on the campaign trail. But no one's ever asked me what my husband thought about my campaign or what my husband thought about me running.
What did he think?
Well, I wouldn't have done this without his support. And I remember one moment before I was deciding to run, and I decided to run about a month before I launched the campaign. I hadn't really thought about it seriously before. And I remember I was talking to him about it and thinking about it. And he said his best friend from college had run for office multiple times and had recently lost a congressional race in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And so he knew how hard it was on his friend and his friend's family. And he said, it's going to be horrible for us, but I really believe it will be better for LA if you run and if you win. And so I want you to do this. And that meant a lot to me. And that was actually a big deciding factor for me in moving forward.
With your partner, did what he expect to happen, did it come true in this process, even though we're on the other side of you being elected?
I think he expected it to be hard. I don't think either of us expected it to be quite this hard.
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly long campaign. I think people in other cities don't quite understand how big city council districts are in Los Angeles. They're enormous. They have 250,000 people. We had almost 200,000 registered voters, 180,000 people who finally voted in this race, 130,000 people, who voted in this race. I mean, just so many people, so many voters that you have to reach out to, and a lot of money that you have to raise. It feels like a much smaller campaign to outsiders than it is from the inside. It's a really big seat.
It's one thing to take this position in the middle of a pandemic, but I know, even though a lot of our listeners and our viewers aren't necessarily in a new position as a council member, they have taken new jobs, they've taken new roles, they're managing new people, they changed companies. And so I think there's a lot to glean from the reality that even people like you have had to figure this out and manage this. What has it been like? Tell us your tricks.
I don't know if I have any tricks. I feel like I should be asking your listeners and viewers for tricks, because I feel like this is completely, it's so new. And it's just, how do you make this work? It's incredibly hard. I think one of the biggest challenges has been building a team during a pandemic and having that team feel a sense of cohesion and purpose. Right. That has been very, very challenging. We did a lot of that during the campaign. The entire general election was run digitally, and we managed to create a lot of team spirit and kind of campaign spirit and community using tools like Slack, using, a lot of social media engagement, all of that stuff. But I think it's very hard sometimes when you're just doing the day-to-day of getting your work done, of listening to constituent concerns, of trying to communicate between different parts of the operation, like your legislative team and your field team, and making sure that communication is happening regularly. It's so much easier to have those kinds of conversations happen when you're walking by someone's office, or if you're like walking by someone in the hallway. And I wish that we were able to do that, and we can't. And so we're trying to find other ways of doing it. The other thing that's been incredibly hard, and that I've been trying to do informally through texting and through just phone calls, is trying to get to know my other colleagues in the council.
Yeah.
Because normally that also happens face to face, and it's way easier to pop by for a chat and say hello than to say, well, do you have time for a call at 6 p.m.? Here's the agenda for the conversation. And, but you have to work with them effectively.
You do. And all of us have to figure out how to work with people. But I hear you, like, the thing that I hear as you're talking about everything that you're doing is like the extra work that we have to do in order to close the gap with peers and teammates and constituents. And I actually want to talk about that because I think one of the things that from the outside in, as someone who's in San Francisco, not in LA, but I think a lot of us here and in many parts of the country look at these big, beautiful cities and then also see their challenges. And I was looking at a lot of your explanatory Twitter threads that you also post to Instagram. And it just like really put this light bulb off for me that you can't really understand the change that you need to be a part of as a citizen unless you actually understand the problem. And that is what you have done so beautifully is really helping us understand what the problems are. Where did the idea, and I know you have an incredible background in urban planning, you have just insane knowledge. Where did it come to you to start explaining that, or where you saw a shift start to happen that if I explain these problems, I'm going to be able to bring people into my solutions?
Well, honestly, it was a campaign strategy, right?
Yeah.
So what happened was that we were running for a seat where most people didn't even know who their council member was. They didn't know what their council member was supposed to do, what their council member was supposed to do for them. And so a lot of the work that we were doing initially in the campaign was just telling people, hey, this is who your council member is. This is their job. This is what they have control over. And then really making a case that if you were to change who was in that office, that the city could work better, and really articulating what those lines of opportunity were in the city for things to get better. And so it really started as a campaign strategy to differentiate ourselves from an incumbent. And we had to do that. But then it became very quickly a way of drawing people in to not just voting for me, but really for volunteering for me, and to say, can you help me make this vision of the future of LA into a reality? Can you become part of the team that goes out and convinces other people that changing your vote away from an incumbent or voting in this election for the first time, which is what so many people did, will matter to them? And you had to make the stakes very clear. And so for me, those explainers were really a way of making the stakes of this race really clear for people.
Yeah. When you look at that, the campaign strategies that you took into this, right? Never having run before, what were the past experiences that you felt yourself pulling from the most?
Well, but right before I ran for this seat, I had been the executive director of Time's Up Entertainment. So Time's Up was an organization that came out of Me Too organizing and activism. It started in Hollywood, expanded really across the world. But I ran the division of the group that was focused on the entertainment industry. And it was really the first time in my life. I'd mostly worked, I was a trained urban planner. I'd worked in the nonprofit sector. I had worked in a lot of places that people didn't pay a lot of attention to for the most part. And suddenly I was in this role where I was being asked to be on TV interviews. I was, giving quotes to the media, doing press conferences. And I was very nervous when I started doing that work. And, but as I did it more and more, I think I started to realize that I was able to shape a narrative. I was able to draw people into that narrative. I was able to make people care about a particular solution to some of the issues that Time's Up was trying to take on. And I think those skills, that ability to say, okay, I'm not just someone who can do good in the world, which I'd done, I tried to do at least in my life, but someone who can bring people into a shared vision for how change can happen. That job really gave me the confidence in my own leadership abilities and my ability to speak and be heard.
Yeah. We talked about your partner. You also have twins. There is, we never want to ask women in high-powered positions how you do it all. It is, it's a bit of a trope. It's not fair to the many pieces that we show up in and exist as. And there is so much that you are doing right now. And what has been the most surprising challenge in folding this very visible, high-powered position into your family life? Were there any particular challenges that surprised you more than others?
Well, I want to go back to one thing that you said before I answer this question, because I think you're right. We now are afraid to ask women, how do you do it all? Because we don't want to, we don't really ask that to men. And so we don't want to ask it to women, right? Because we don't want to insult them, which I
But
think
also I want to know,
right.
Councilmember Raman, how you do it all so that I can be like, yes, I can do it. And I fully interrupted you,
Yeah.
but
No, please call me Nithya. But also, I really think one of the things I want to acknowledge, because I want to make sure that people who are thinking about taking on this kind of work also understand, is that I had a lot of help. I had a huge amount of help. One, I had a partner who was in a stage of his career where he could take on a lot of the childcare responsibilities. So he became actively the lead caregiver for our children. When they were still going to school, he dropped them off. And then we were able to pay for a babysitter, a nanny who came in every afternoon to pick them up. And so I was relieved from those responsibilities. And then later in the campaign, my parents came and stayed with me during the primary election for about 3 months. And then during the general election, when we were in the pandemic and we couldn't send the kids to school, my in-laws came and stayed with me for 5 months. And it was only because of the family support that I had, people who stepped up in my life, that I was able to do this. So I just want to be clear that unless we make sure that childcare is really available to all working parents, and that it's way cheaper or free, hopefully, that we will not see the kind of participation in public spaces from people across the socioeconomic spectrum, across the genders. Like, we're just not going to see it unless we focus on that. And I think it's important to talk about how much you need in order to be able to step up.
We talked with Amanda Littman in our previous season about, how anyone can run for something and why actually local elections are where it is at. But can you tell me your perspective of that, of why thinking small, even though District 4 is not small whatsoever, but why anyone thinking about the change that they want to make, why the city level is actually where it's at?
Yeah, and I would even think smaller here in Los Angeles. There's all these neighborhood councils and all of these other local elected positions that are also really exciting. And I want to talk a little bit about, one of the issues that's very close to my heart, which is homelessness.
Yeah.
And where opposition or support for resources for people experiencing homelessness comes from. And it usually comes from the neighborhood level, right? So the most powerful place to impact change with regards to resources for people experiencing homelessness might be at your neighborhood council level. So that is absolutely a place where you need to step up, where you can show leadership, where you can take responsibility, and where you can advocate for more. And that's actually where I started. I joined my neighborhood council's homelessness committee as its co-chair, and I did that for 3 years before I decided to run for city council. And it was a great place to say, I want to be a leader on these issues. I want to change my neighborhood's approach to these issues. And I did that. And I ended up meeting all kinds of other people who also cared about it, and really putting a whole community of people together with my neighbors who felt passionately about it.
Yeah, there's such a beauty of the idea of a neighbor, of a neighborhood, of neighborly. And I feel like, if there's one thing the pandemic has reminded me of, it's like, I live in this place. Like, I better get involved in this place. And, for you, the 3 years that you spent in that neighborhood council before thinking about running for council member, was there a moment that you remember being like, I actually need to take this to another level? Or was it just a series of small experiences and interactions that tipped you into taking on this beast?
I was represented in just one area, but I worked in a region that had multiple council members representing it. And I bumped up against obstacles in all of those offices as we were trying to get things done here. And I thought over and over again that I felt like our elected officials were obstacles to change. Not always, not on every issue, not on
a lot of times.
but I felt that over and over again. And I think each time I felt it, it made me think about what somebody in that role could do if they had a more expansive notion of what that role meant, if they had a bigger idea of what change looked like in Los Angeles. And finally, when I decided to run myself, I think I brought a lot of that thinking with me into that.
Totally. And it just makes like no experience lives in isolation. Like we do bring it with us in I think beautiful ways. And, as I'm listening to you talk about, and I know this from, following your work and your race about homelessness and, having been a decade in San Francisco, I already shared this, but it obviously is something that we see and that we think about in places like San Francisco and LA. And then the pandemic hits this past year, and all of a sudden I hear family members in the suburbs of Texas, friends in Wisconsin, people talking about homelessness and how much it is showing up in their communities in ways that it used to just be, it felt like a California conversation. And for anyone who is noticing this in their neighborhood, in their cities, not to go down your explanatory Twitter threads, because I do want to also point them there, but where do you tell them to show up?
I think I would look for a local organization that is not just serving food, that's not just providing clothes, but actually connecting people with the systems that can help people get out of homelessness. So when I was doing my work in my own neighborhood, one thing we ended up doing was actually paying for a case manager to come to the weekly showers that we had set up at a church near
for human interaction.
Not just for human interaction. Not just for human interaction, but those case managers were able to build those relationships over time, to build that relationship of trust, and then to track people as they took all of the steps you need to take in order to get out of homelessness. Like, you don't just say, okay, I want to go live in a house, or I want to get a shelter bed. And you can't just instantaneously get that bed or get a house, right? It's for a house, it can take months.
Right.
For a shelter bed, it can take days. And for all of that, you need to be able to have access to those people who can guide you through what is, very confusing process. Mm-hmm. And so I think anytime you are working on the issue of homelessness, ideally you're doing it in a place where you can also connect people experiencing homelessness to those individuals who have the ability to guide them out of it. Yeah. And I think that is the place where I would be looking for in your community if you want to volunteer, because then you'll also see the gaps. Yeah. And then you can advocate for the changes that your community needs.
I so appreciate you sharing that with us, for people who are, not in your district, but from someone like you who is creating incredibly progressive policies around this issue that I know really it hurts society. It hurts us to be a part of. So thank you for that filtering system for all of us to look for, because I think anyone listening can go and do that. And thank you for the work that you are doing. And Councilmember Raman, I will call you Nithya. What is one thing, before we let you go, that you are batshit grateful for?
Oh, I'm so grateful. Every morning I wake up and I see my twins, and they give me a special hug called a morning hug.
Oh, stop it.
That is the thing that I am absolutely batshit grateful for every single day. And in fact, the night before my election, I remember thinking, well, no matter what happens, I'll still wake up the morning after the election and I'll still get my morning hug.
Your morning hugs. Thank you for sharing that with us. I also am now going to incorporate morning hugs into my life. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was such a pleasure.